Magdalene of Canossa. A life for God and for the poor.
The city of Verona, towards the end of the 18th century, was a scene of strong contrast.
The rich, noble families lived in luxury, and their homes were palaces and mansions.
Hidden in the alleys of the city, near the church of San Zeno, were the slums where the poor were crammed in substandard dwellings. Children roamed the streets, often fighting and quarreling, hurling vulgar words at whoever was passing by. Most of them were orphans or were abandoned to themselves to struggle for their survival.
A carriage passed by.
Let's break the window. They have so much to eat. Let them at least suffer the cold.
In the carriage was an elegant young lady belonging to one of the richest families of the city. Marchioness Magdalene of Canossa looked out of the window and saw the faces and the misery of those children. It was a sight she could never forget. It had touched the depths of her heart.
In the ancient church of San Zeno, Magdalene was listening to the gospel reading.
Jesus looked at the rich young man with love and said, "Only one thing is missing. Go and sell all that you possess and give it to the poor. Then come and follow me." Magdalene was only 17, yet she knew that she had to leave everything to follow Jesus. But when and how?
At the door of the church, she came face to face with a beggar.
The dark, sunken eyes of the woman revealed the suffering of a life without any hope. While Magdalene was giving her some money, she realized how small this gesture was.
Back at Canossa Palace, there was great excitement.
Laura was trying out her wedding gown. Magdalene stepped into the house and saw her elder sister, radiant with joy. She congratulated Laura, but her heart was somewhere else. She was seriously thinking of spending some quiet time in a Carmelite convent, in silence and prayer. She would better be able to find out what was God's will for her.
Lord, I want to seek you and you alone, but I also want to serve the poor.
Before her eyes were the abandoned children, the suffering and the sick who needed help.
Magdalene remained in a convent for 10 months. The Lord made her realize that she was not called to be a cloistered nun. Much as she loved prayer, she felt that God was calling her to be a contemplative in action.
Magdalene decided to return to her family.
Magdalene was born in Canossa Palace on 1st of March 1774, the second child of Marquis Ottavio of Canossa and Teresa Suha, a Hungarian countess.
Magdalene and her 3 sisters, Laura, Rose, and Eleanor, and brother Boniface, grew up happily.
But sorrow soon entered her life. At the age of 5, she lost her father. Marquis Ottavio died while on a geological excursion to the mountains.
Her mother remarried 2 years later, leaving the 5 children orphans.
Their guardian, Uncle Jerome, put them in the care of a French governess, Madame Capron. Magdalene received a refined education according to the custom of the noble families of her time. She learned mathematics, Italian and French, as well as painting and embroidery.
She was a lively, affectionate, and intelligent girl. She loved music and dancing and felt the attraction of a bright future as a noble lady with good prospects for marriage.
But due to her upright nature, she was misunderstood and even unjustly treated by Madame Capron.
At the age of 15, she was struck by a mysterious illness, including fever and smallpox. It meant a long period of isolation from her dear ones. The experience of sickness, however, helped Magdalene to grow and to mature.
Throughout her painful trials, she was sustained by the tender love of Jesus crucified and of Mary, the Mother of Sorrows, who became for her
the mother of charity at the foot of the cross of her Son. She grew in her desire to dedicate her life to God and to the service of the poor and the suffering.
In 1796, the French army, under the leadership of Napoleon Bonaparte, invaded Verona. The attempt to overthrow French rule during Easter the following year failed, and the French came back to power. There was widespread poverty, ignorance, and moral decay. People were desperate.
"Thieves! Thieves! Catch them!
Shouted the fruit seller.
Those rascals ran away with my apples."
For the street children, that seemed to be the only way to survive.
What's your name?
Lucy,
And yours?
Tony,
The children came running.
Do you know how to read and write?
no,
Do you attend catechism class?
no,
Does anybody know how to pray the Our Father?
no.
There was silence, so Magdalene started to tell them about God, that God is our Father, a Father who loves us.
Magdalene was pensive that evening when she returned home. The poor and the little ones seemed to confirm the extraordinary plan which God was revealing to her.
She listened attentively to what God was telling her through His Word. In fact, she herself recalled in her memoirs.
While attending Holy Mass, as the priest read a scriptural text from the book of Tobit, I felt a strong inner impulse to dedicate myself to works of charity, and I resolved to do so.
While receiving Holy Communion, she felt intimately united with Jesus. At the same time, she had a passionate desire to make Him known and loved by the abandoned children she met and to prevent sin.
Lord, show me the way.
How Magdalene longed to leave the palace at once in order to educate them in the faith and to form their hearts to love.
My daughter, God wants you all for Himself. This is certain. As for what you'll need to do for His glory, He will show you in His time. Meanwhile, continue to love Him with all your heart and to serve those around you generously, following His example.
This was the advice of her spiritual director, Don Luigi Libera, who guided her in her gradual discovery of her vocation and mission in life.
In 1797, Magdalene saw the Blessed Virgin Mary in a dream, revealing to her the 3 fields of work of charity which she and her first companions were being called to dedicate themselves: the education of poor girls in charity schools, the teaching of catechism in parishes, and assisting the sick in hospitals.
However, Magdalene could not leave her family yet. In the same year, Uncle Jerome's young wife was struck by a deadly illness. At her deathbed, she entrusted her baby, Charles, to Magdalene, who accepted to be a mother to her little cousin. She also had to look after her sick granduncle and take over the heavy responsibility of managing the household and the extensive family properties.
Meanwhile, Magdalene did not waste time. She continued with her charitable activities. She looked for good families to receive some of the abandoned children. She herself paid for the education of a poor Jewish girl, and even managed to persuade Uncle Jerome to be the child's baptism godfather and to adopt her.
In 1799, Magdalene was able to gather some poor girls from the slums of San Zeno, and with a few companions, she started to take care of them and educate them in a small rented house. This was the little seed of what would grow into a marvelous work of God.
In this little house, the girls learned to read and to write, to sew and to keep themselves clean. The place was poor and small, but it was a home where they found love, and they began once again to smile.
Take some hot chicken soup. I prepared it myself. It's good for you. Look, I brought you some clean clothes. Let me help you.
Magdalene's generosity knew no limits. Together with other members of the Sodality for hospital visitation, she would visit the poor sick women to assist them in their material and spiritual needs.
Magdalene wanted the blessing of the bishop for her work.
Monsignor, this is the plan of the works of charity I hope to start.
My dear Marchioness, I've heard of your numerous charitable activities. I would like you to concentrate your energy in the education of the abandoned girls.
Magdalene was really like a mother to these children. Even though she was a marchioness, she would lovingly perform the most humble tasks.
How she longed to leave Canossa Palace so as to dedicate herself full-time to the care of her dear girls in a little house of San Zeno. But Uncle Jerome and the rest of the family would not let her go to live in such wretched surroundings. You must not forget that you belong to the Canossa family. A Canossa will never lower herself to live in a hut together with a bunch of dirty and ignorant girls.
Magdalene was already 30 years old and could actually do what she wanted. But she decided not to break her relationship with her family. For the time being, it was better for her to divide her time between her family and her girls. She did not, however, give up her plan.
Meanwhile, the number of girls increased and she had to rent a bigger place. The suppressed monastery of St. Joseph's was ideal. It had spacious grounds for the children to run around and to play. Magdalene could now gather more children from the streets.
Magdalene finally obtained permission from Napoleon himself to use freely the old monastery for the works of charity she intended to develop. On the 8th of May, 1808, she was able to move into her tiny cell in St. Joseph's Convent after saying goodbye to her family and the splendid halls of Canossa Palace.
The pressing call of Jesus was ringing in her heart. Go into the whole world to make Jesus known and loved.
My dear daughters, see how much Jesus loves us. He has given his life for us on the cross. He died so that we may live forever.
Magdalene communicated her great love for the Eucharist to her girls.
Jesus gives himself to us in Holy Communion. He is the bread of eternal life. Those who eat this bread will live forever. Let us learn from Jesus to be good and generous with everyone. Look at Mary, the mother of Jesus. How much she must have suffered beneath the cross. Jesus gave her to us to be our mother, and she's teaching us to love Jesus with all our hearts.
In fact, right from the start, Magdalene dedicated her institute to Mary, Mother of Charity, at the foot of the cross.
If we should have the privilege of being recognized as daughters of charity, I would like us to wear the medal of Our Lady of Sorrows, for she is the real foundress and mother of our humble institute.
Magdalene went to Venice in 1812 in response to a request for help to start a school of charity. Together with her companion Elizabeth Mazzaroli, she went up and down the alleys, along the canals, looking for the lost sheep and bringing them back safely into the fold.
She gathered many poor girls who were in moral danger from the streets and welcomed them to the charity school. She also visited the sick in hospitals, involved the noble ladies in helping the poor, and even organized monthly retreats for priests. Wherever she went, with her typical Veronese sense of humor, the air of Montebaldo, she brought joy and laughter.
One day, Magdalene witnessed a scene of an 11-year-old girl showing her tantrums. Her teachers were unable to control her. Magdalene observed the girl intensely.
To everybody's surprise, she said to the teachers,
"Forgive her. One day, this girl will become a daughter of charity."
What?
She'll burn the convent if she joins us. Not only will she become a religious in our institute, she will assist me in the last years of my life and at the moment of my death.
And years later, this really took place.
Look and do like me.
Jesus became obedient unto death, death on the cross.
While she was in Venice, Magdalene had a new mystical encounter with Jesus. Contemplating her crucified Lord, she wrote years later,
I experienced an inner stirring, and I felt urged to follow the crucified Christ who breathed nothing but charity.
Magdalene saw beyond the sufferings of Jesus, the expression of the greatest love.
Calvary was for Magdalene the Mount of Lovers, where Jesus on the cross breathed nothing but charity.
The constant contemplation and active imitation of Christ crucified became the driving force of Magdalene's entire life. She understood that she too must breathe nothing but love for those who were in need.
Charity is a fire that spreads out to embrace all.
Magdalene was soon called to set up new foundations in other parts of Italy. In the big city of Milan in 1816, in Bergamo in 1820, and in the city of Trent in 1828.
Everywhere, the door of the Canossian convent was always open to the poor and the little ones, because they had the right to enter. It was their house.
Ever ready to respond creatively to the greatest need of her time, she looked for collaborators among the lay women who would go where the religious sisters were unable to go. She designed residential training courses for country teachers, young women who would be apostles of charity in their own towns and villages.
Many other young women, sharing in the vision of Magdalene, came to join her. They formed a community of religious sisters who combined deep prayer life with active apostolic service to the poor.
Our vocation is that of the daughters of charity, servants of the poor. We must not only love God with all our hearts and our neighbor as ourselves, but we must love them as Jesus has loved them. He loved them till the sacrifice of himself on the cross. We shall wear a simple uniform as a sign of our consecration to the Lord.
Magdalene wanted her community to be at the service of the church. She requested and obtained the official approval of Pope Leo XII for her institute on 23rd December 1828.
But in her heart she had always wanted to start also a community of priests and lay brothers who would care for the boys. While in Milan, Magdalene met a young carpenter, Joseph Cassana from Bergamo, who had a great passion for gathering young boys for Sunday school and teaching them catechism.
Magdalene invited Joseph and his friend, Benedict Belloni, to start works of charity for the numerous boys who roamed the streets.
See, God needs you, not as carpenters, but as sons of charity to make Jesus known to the poor boys of Venice, so that they may love him.
The religious community for men was started in Venice in 1831. Magdalene had the great joy of obtaining the approval of Pope Gregory XVI for the Institute of the Canossian Sons of Charity the following year.
Joseph and Benedict were tireless in making Jesus known and loved by the boys at their catechism classes. In the evening, they taught the boys how to read and write and were always available to listen to their problems. In short, they were like fathers to them.
They invented new games, organized competitions, and even played football with the boys. Instead of roaming the streets, more and more boys were running to the youth center.
Without fail, every evening before going home, the boys would join Joseph and Benedict for prayer. Attracted by their example, some of them even asked to remain. So Magdalene's dream for her sons of charity slowly and steadily became a reality.
Magdalene's intense apostolic and charitable works rapidly weakened her frail body, already worn out by the hardships of a poor life and frequent traveling. 10th of April, 1835. It was Friday in Passion Week.
Lovingly assisted by her spiritual daughters, Magdalene asked to be lifted out of her bed to pray the 3 Hail Marys. She fell on her knees with outstretched arms. Then, slowly folding her arms in the form of a cross and bending her head, she heaved her last breath and yielded up her spirit to the Lord.
Magdalene had left a precious legacy to a spiritual family. Her parting words were,
Love one another, treating one another with the greatest respect and charity. Love and serve my beloved poor. Help them to know and love Jesus. We shall meet again in heaven.
Magdalene's charity was universal. Her missionary spirit is clearly manifested in her readiness to go even to the North Pole or to the land of the whales to make Jesus known. She said,
I offered myself to the Lord, ready to go anywhere in the world in order to serve Him.
It was in 1860 that the missionary yearning of Magdalene became a reality. The first group of Canossian sisters reached Hong Kong from Italy after a dangerous journey of 44 days by sea.
There they started orphanages and schools and soon moved into Macau and mainland China.
From there, the charism of charity spread like a fire to embrace the whole world.
Today there are over 3,000 Canossian sisters spread over 34 countries in 5 continents. The Canossian Sons of Charity are now in Italy, Brazil, the Philippines and India.
The Canossian family also includes an extensive network of lay Canossians, secular missionaries, lay missionaries, Canossian educators and collaborators, as well as international volunteers who find in the Canossian spirituality the impetus to live their lives meaningfully, inspired by the example of Jesus crucified, the greatest love.
Magdalene of Canossa was proclaimed a saint by Pope John Paul II in St. Peter's Square in Rome on 2nd of October 1988. In the words of the Pope, she has become a sign of joy and hope for those who carry in themselves the wound of suffering from illness, poverty, social marginalization or exploitation.
Magdalene's spirituality can be summed up as the spirit of Christ crucified, the greatest love, a spirit of humility, gentleness, fortitude and zeal, a most patient, most generous and most amiable spirit. Her spirituality lives on today in the hearts of all who will continue to tell the women and men of our time the story of God's great love.